You people are always looking for trouble, get out of my bar before I make you. What shocking truth was about to unfold? That's what Donnie Mercer said to the quiet man in the corner, a man who hadn't spoken to anyone, hadn't even finished his first drink, just sat there watching the wall, carrying more in his silence than most do in their whole lives. What did Donnie not know about this stranger? What Donnie didn't know was who he was talking to and what happens when you disrespect a man who once fought so others didn't have to. Because Donnie thought he was just kicking out a stranger, he had no idea what was coming. Welcome to Graceful Valor Stories, where tales of compassion and kindness are told. Let's uncover what really happened. I've lived in Bayfield all my life, a small coastal town where the salt hangs in the air like memory and everybody knows what time the mail truck passes. After I retired from the core logistics, nothing glamorous, I moved into a weathered house near the docks, just a short walk from the harbor and the only tavern that still serves draft beer in a cold glass, the Sandline Tavern. You know, the kind, worn floors, faded jukebox, the same 8 faces every Tuesday night. It isn't much, but it's ours. That's where I first saw him. It was a Tuesday, late October. A misty rain clung to the windows and the cold crept in through the gaps around the door. No matter how hard Donnie patched them, I was nursing my usual domestic, nothing fancy, when the front door creaked open and a man stepped inside. He wasn't a regular, that was obvious. Bayfield doesn't get many strangers on weeknights, not unless they're lost or looking to disappear. He was average height, maybe 40, short military cut hair, a lean frame beneath a faded gray hoodie and worn jeans, but it was the way he moved that caught my eye. Not slow, not rushed, just deliberate, every step placed with quiet intention, like a man who had spent years walking through places where one wrong move meant you didn't walk out. He took the stool at the far corner under the chart of old shipping lanes that Donnie never bothered to dust, sat with his back to the wall, eyes scanning without moving his head, didn't order food, just a beer, didn't talk to anyone, didn't even glance at the television which was playing the same sports highlights on loop. That was Luke Barrett, though none of us knew his name then. Word was he'd done 15 years with the Navy SEALs, 3 tours in Afghanistan, maybe more, got discharged not long ago, honorably, but not by choice, some injury they didn't patch up right. Now he was living above the bait shop 2 blocks down in a room with a broken heater and a view of the alley. He didn't complain, he never asked for a discount. He just showed up like someone trying to remember how to live again. I kept an eye on him that night, not out of suspicion, out of respect. I've seen that look before on the faces of men who came home and weren't quite sure what home meant anymore, but not everyone sees it that way. Donnie Mercer, the tavern owner, didn't like Luke from the second he walked in. Now, Donnie's not a terrible guy, but he's old school stubborn, and he's got a long memory for the wrong things. Years ago, some sailors got rowdy in his place, broke a chair, knocked over a display case. Ever since, Donnie's had a chip on his shoulder about military types. He watched Luke for 20 minutes, didn't say a word, just wiped the same glass over and over, eyes locked on that quiet man in the corner, and then he snapped. I heard the chair leg scrape as Donnie marched over, arms folded, jaw tight. You casing the joint? He asked loud enough for everyone to hear. Luke looked up, calm, steady. Just having a beer, he said quietly. Donnie scoffed. Yeah, well, you've been sitting there 20 minutes staring at that chart like you're planning a heist. There was a pause. I was thinking, Luke replied. Donnie leaned in. Well, I don't like that kind of thinking in my place, makes the other customers nervous. I looked around, no one else was even watching, nobody cared, but Donnie wasn't looking for backup, he just wanted to swing his weight. Luke stayed still. What kind of thinking is that? Yeah, the quiet kind, Donnie snapped. The military kind. You guys walk in like you own the place, always looking for a fight. Luke blinked slowly. That same calm, that same restraint I'd seen on men holding back a storm. I haven't said a word to anyone but the bartender, he said. Haven't even finished my beer. Donnie didn't care. He straightened up and pointed toward the door. I don't want trouble, he said, so I suggest you take your business elsewhere. Luke took a long breath, then slowly he set his glass down on the counter, still half full. I believe, he said, his voice low but firm, that I have the right to finish my drink. Donnie slammed his palm on the bar. You believe wrong, buddy. He jerked his chin toward the end of the counter. That's when I saw Cal, Donnie's so-called bouncer, standing with arms crossed, big guy, all bulk, no awareness. Luke looked at Cal, then back at Donnie. He didn't move, but I saw something shift in his eyes, not fear, not even anger, resignation, the kind that says, I've survived worse than this, but it still stings. He stood up, pushed the stool back in, left his beer untouched. Keep the change, he said softly. There was no change. He walked to the door slow and unhurried, no slamming, no shouting, just the quiet dignity of a man who had already bled for a country that forgot how to see him. Donnie called after him, and don't come back, we don't need your kind here. Luke didn't look back, and that right there should have been the end of it, but it wasn't, because Luke Barrett didn't call the cops, he didn't post on social media, he didn't go looking for justice. He just stepped into the cold night, pulled out a battered old phone, opened a secure messaging app, and typed a short note. The Sandline Tavern, Bayfield, owner Donnie Mercer, unprovoked ejection, hostile to veterans, just FYI. Luke, he hit send, then walked home in the rain like a man used to being left behind. What he didn't know, what none of us knew, was that the message didn't land. In silence, it landed in a place where loyalty still mattered. It landed in the hands of men who once followed his lead through fire, and somewhere hundreds of miles away, one of them looked down at that message and said 4 words Luke never expected to hear again: "We've got a 6." I don't think Luke expected anything to come of that message. He didn't send it out of spite, he sent it because when you've served as long as he has, sometimes you just need someone to know, not to fix it, just to witness it. But the thing about Navy SEALs is no one gets left behind, not on the battlefield, not at home, and certainly not in a rundown bar on a rainy Tuesday night. Word spreads faster than most people think, especially in the quiet channels that don't need phone towers or front-page news. By the next afternoon, the town of Bayfield was still itself, slow, unbothered, fishermen hauling nets, kids riding bikes past the post office, and Donnie Mercer. Well, Donnie was behind the counter at the Sandline Tavern, just like always, counting till money, setting up the happy hour draft taps, whistling an old tune that never quite matched the beat. At 3:07 p.m., 3 black SUVs rolled up silently along Harbor Street, no engine revving, no music, just 3 vehicles, matte black, unmarked. Polished like mirrors, they parked in perfect formation, diagonal, tight. I was across the street refilling the ice bin outside the bait shop. I saw them before Donnie did, and when the doors opened, I stopped breathing. 12 men stepped out. They didn't wear uniforms, just jeans, neutral-colored jackets, boots that had walked through more dust and fire than this town would ever know, but it was the way they moved that told the story. Effortless precision. No chatter, no hesitation. Every one of them scanned the environment, subtle, practiced. They weren't showboating, they were operating on instinct, and in the center of them stood Chief Graham Reaper Dalton. If Luke Barrett was the quiet echo of war, Graham Dalton was the steady thunder behind it. He was older now, gray at the temples, lines cut deep into his jaw, but nothing about him looked fragile. He had the kind of posture that made people sit straighter without realizing it. They didn't walk, they approached silently as if the entire block had suddenly become a staging zone. When they reached the door of the Sandline Tavern, the 12 of them stopped. No one said a word. Donnie, oblivious, was still behind the bar, but when the door creaked open, he looked up and froze. For a second, he didn't move. I could see it from the window, his hands stilled on the glass he'd been drying for the 3rd time, his shoulders stiffened. He knew, maybe not the details, maybe not the names, but he knew exactly who these men were. Reaper stepped forward. Alone, the others fanning out behind him, shoulder to shoulder, not aggressive, not armed, just there, blocking the entrance, dominating the space like a cold front. Donnie blinked and cleared his throat, tried to sound casual. "Afternoon, fellas, something I can help you with?" Reaper didn't flinch, didn't smile. "We're here about yesterday," he said, voice calm. Even Donnie furrowed his brow. "Yesterday? One of our brothers came in, sat down, ordered a drink." Reaper took one step closer, his voice never rose, but somehow it filled every corner of the room. He was quiet, respectful, caused no trouble, and you threw him out. Donnie shifted. "Hey, now, maybe there was just a misunderstanding, bad vibe, you know. I didn't know who he was." "You didn't care who he was," Reaper corrected. "You judged him based on what he looked like, what he represented." "That's not a misunderstanding, that's disrespect." Silence fell heavy across the room. I wasn't the only one watching now. A few locals outside had started drifting toward the sidewalk, pretending to check their phones, but really drawn by instinct, the kind that whispers, "Something's happening." Reaper continued, steady as steel. "We don't start fights, not anymore, but we don't forget, and we don't tolerate dishonor." Donnie chuckled nervously. "Look, fellas, I support the troops, all right. Got a flag out front." Reaper glanced toward the window where a small sun-bleached flag sticker clung to the glass beside a "No Outside Drinks" sign. "That's not support," he said coldly, "that's decoration." Donnie looked smaller now, his chest had deflated, his voice dropped. "What do you want?" he muttered. Reaper paused, the weight of the moment settled hard. "We want 3 things, he held up one finger. "First, you're going to call Luke Barrett right now. You're going to apologize, clearly, sincerely, while we listen. A second finger. Second, you're going to make a public donation to the Navy SEAL Foundation, a real one in Luke's name." Donnie opened his mouth to protest, but Reaper raised his 3rd finger. "Third, you're going to make it known by action, not signage, that this establishment respects veterans, that men who served aren't just tolerated here, they're welcome." Donnie swallowed. "That's a lot." Reaper stepped closer. "No," he said, "that's bare minimum." In the silence that followed, you could hear a pin drop, or maybe a bar owner's pride cracking in half. Donnie hesitated, his hands trembled slightly. He glanced behind the bar. Kel, the bouncer, had disappeared into the back room and wasn't coming out. Finally, Donnie reached for the phone on the counter. He dialed. The ring echoed unnaturally loud in the room. I don't know what Luke was doing when he answered. Probably walking the coastline like he always did, but I imagine his brows lifted slightly when he heard the voice on the other end. "This is Donnie Mercer," the bar owner said, voice low. "I owe you an apology, Mr. Barrett." He glanced up. Reaper nodded for him to continue. I made assumptions, I was rude. You deserve better. You're welcome here anytime, as an honored guest." "And I'm sorry." He hung up, hands shaking. Reaper didn't thank him, he just turned to his team. Doc Anders stepped forward, then pulled Donnie aside quietly. They disappeared into the office for what I assume was a very one-sided conversation about donation amounts and federal receipts outside. The rest of the SEALs took seats, ordered nothing, said nothing, just held the room, not with noise, with presence. That's the thing about real warriors, they don't need to raise their voices, their silence is louder than most men shouting, and that day, Bayfield heard it clear as a bell. The thing about silence, real, heavy silence, is that it demands attention. That's what filled the Sandline Tavern for the next hour after Donnie made that first call. 12 men in plainclothes sat quietly around the room, not one drink, not one laugh, not even small talk. They didn't come to socialize, they came to stand watch, and their presence did more to reshape that bar than any renovation ever could. I stayed in my seat near the back, coffee long since gone cold. I didn't move either, not because I was scared, but because I knew what I was witnessing. It wasn't a protest, it wasn't revenge, it was correction, and Donnie Mercer, God help him, was finally starting to understand that. While the rest of the team took positions near the windows in the bar, Doc Anders led Donnie into the office behind the taps, door closed, blinds drawn. I couldn't hear a thing, but I didn't need to. I knew the tone. I've heard it before in barracks and after-action briefings, calm voices carrying heavy consequences. Donnie might have owned the deed to the Sandline Tavern, but for that hour, he didn't own the room inside. The SEALs sat with the stillness of men trained to wait in the shadows for hours, days if needed. That kind of patience doesn't fade after discharge, it just waits for moments like this. One leaned back in a chair near the jukebox, another stood against the far wall with arms folded, eyes scanning. Reaper himself took the booth nearest the door, posture relaxed, but you could feel the readiness behind it, like a drawn bow that hadn't been loosed yet. A young couple wandered in halfway through looking for happy hour. They took one step through the door, looked around, and turned right back out. Smart kids. Time crawled. I glanced at the clock above the bar. 4:12 p.m. Then the door to the office creaked open. Donnie stepped out. He looked different, paler, shoulders slumped, jaw clenched like he'd bitten through something sour. He didn't glance at anyone, not even Reaper, just walked behind the bar, picked up the same phone he'd used before, and dialed again. He held it to his ear with hands that trembled just enough to show. It rang twice, then a quiet voice answered. I couldn't hear it, but I knew who it was. Luke Barrett. Donnie cleared his throat twice, then he said it. Luke, it's Donnie Mercer. I wanted to apologize. His voice cracked, but he pushed on. I misjudged you. I made assumptions I shouldn't have. You didn't deserve that. And you're welcome here anytime, as an honored guest. That's not just words, that's a promise. He listened for a second, then nodded slowly as if Luke could see him through the phone. Yeah, all right, I thank you. He hung up. The phone made a soft click as it returned to the cradle. For a moment, Donnie just stood there, both hands on the bar, breathing, trying to steady himself in the weight of what had just happened. Across the room, Reaper stood. He didn't nod, didn't smile, just looked Donnie in the eye with a gaze that spoke louder than any speech. You were seen, you were measured. Now act better. One by one, the SEALs rose. No signal, no barked command, just movement, fluid and quiet like a tide pulling back from the shore. They walked toward the door in pairs, boots soft against the old floorboards. No fanfare, no threats, no farewell. They came in like a whisper. They left the same way. Reaper was the last to exit. He paused at the threshold, turned slightly back toward the bar, and said only this: next time a veteran walks in, try seeing him. Then he was gone. The door shut gently behind them. The bell didn't even ring. Outside, the three SUVs started their engines in perfect sync. They pulled away from the curb like a convoy returning from a mission completed. Not one drop of fuel wasted, not one gesture too big. And just like that, the Sandline Tavern was quiet again, but not the same. Donnie stood behind the bar for a long while, motionless, staring at the counter like it might offer some kind of redemption if he looked hard enough. Eventually, he picked up a towel and began wiping the same spot he'd cleaned a dozen times before, only this time, his hands didn't stop shaking. I finished my coffee, left a few bills folded under the mug. On my way out, I passed him. He didn't look up, but as I reached the door, I said, some debts don't get paid with words, you'll figure that out. He didn't answer. I didn't expect him to. Out on the sidewalk, the wind off the water had picked up, salt in the air again, the kind that gets in your bones and reminds you you're alive. I turned left, took the long way home, just needed to walk, and as I passed the alley behind the bait shop, I saw Luke Barrett. He was leaning against the seawall, coffee in hand, expression unreadable. He'd heard the apology. I knew it. I thought about calling out, about saying something, but I didn't, because Luke didn't need applause, didn't need attention. He got something better that day. He was seen, he was heard, and he was answered. And Donnie Mercer, well, he lost something that Date lost, but maybe, just maybe, he started to gain something, too, because sometimes it takes 12 silent men in plainclothes to remind a grown man what respect actually looks like, and sometimes all it takes to shake a town is one wrong turned right. A week passed, the rain lifted, Bayfield returned to its quiet rhythm, boats in the harbor, Gulls circling the docks, old men arguing about bait in the corner of the general store. Most folks moved on the way small towns do. They didn't talk about the 3 black SUVs that rolled through Main Street, didn't bring up the 12 strangers who sat silent in the Sandline Tavern for an hour without ordering a single thing, but they remembered, because something had changed. You could feel it in the way people straightened up when a veteran walked by, in the way conversations paused just for a breath when someone mentioned that night at the bar. Donnie Mercer didn't speak of it, but he'd been different ever since. And then on the following Tuesday, same hour, same week, sunlight sliding through the clouds, Luke Barrett walked back into the Sandline Tavern. I was there, same corner seat, same lukewarm coffee. I'd come by mostly out of habit like always, but when that door opened and Luke stepped in, the room exhaled and held its breath at the same time. He wore the same plain jeans, the same old hoodie, no medals, no uniform, no fanfare, but something was different. He stood straighter, eyes clearer, like a man whose burden was still there, but shared now, not carried alone. Donnie saw him first. To his credit, he didn't flinch. He set down the rag he'd been using to clean the bar, stepped out from behind the counter, walked straight up to Luke, not fast, not slow, and he said 5 words, "Good to see you, sir." Then, with steady hands, he poured a fresh draft, cold, clean glass, no questions asked. He slid it across the bar and added, "On the house." Luke took the beer without a smile, but with a nod, just enough to say, "I see you, too." Then the bouncer, Cal, the one who'd hung back last time, walked to the door and held it open like a doorman at a military ball, didn't say a word, just gave Luke a single sharp nod as he passed, the kind of nod you give a man who once cleared a room so you didn't have to. Luke sat at the same stool he had before, back to the wall, eyes on the chart, quiet. But this time, no tension, no glares, no sideways glances. The jukebox played something old and slow. Pool balls clacked quietly in the back. A couple whispered at the far table, but no one interrupted him. He sipped his beer alone, but not invisible, not anymore. I watched it all from my corner, didn't move, didn't speak, just observed the way old soldiers do, measuring posture, the temperature of a room, and I saw what mattered. Respect didn't shout that day, it didn't march in boots or stand at attention. It sat quietly at the edge of a bar in the form of a man who had once led warriors through fire and was now simply asking to finish his drink in peace. That night, when Luke finally stood up and left, no one stopped him, no one needed to. He walked out the same way he came in, unarmed, unshaken, but this time, everyone knew what they were looking at. They saw more than scars and silence, they saw who he was. Not just what he had done, but what he still carried. And me, I sat there a long time after he left, let my coffee go cold again, watched the waves roll against the dock in slow rhythm, like breath, because for the first time in a while, something inside me felt settled, like, you see, I'd known what it's like to come home and feel forgotten, to carry a service record that no one asks about anymore, to walk into rooms where the only thing louder than the music is the feeling that you don't belong. But watching Luke Barrett that night, I remembered something I'd almost let go of, that when a Navy SEAL is disrespected, he doesn't stand alone, and when one of them is dismissed, the others show up, quietly, firmly, without explanation, to remind the world of something we forget too easily. Loyalty doesn't end at discharge, and respect isn't something given, it's something you earn back when someone finally has the courage to demand it. And in Bayfield that night, it came back home in our darkest moments. Kindness still finds a way, often in the quietest places. Not everyone who helps wants recognition, some just need to know that today someone isn't going hungry, and sometimes that alone is enough to change a life. You may forget the story, but if no one retells it, history stays silent forever. Subscribe to Graceful Valor Stories, where justice is honored, kindness is remembered, and no act of quiet heroism is ever lost.